Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is the new Saturnine Dreadnought, and I've painted it up to go with my Death Guard, which have been sponsored by the Army Painter. So this is part of the 30k in 30 days project, and I'm pretty happy with the end result. This is an answer to the question, can you dip vehicles? Because it does come up occasionally. People ask, oh, should I wash a vehicle or pin wash it or what have you? Nah. I'm going to show you how to get the most out of a dip, or even an acrylic wash. It would work relatively similarly, just using a couple of brushes. So all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below, and they'll be linked to a couple of them in previous painting videos as well. I'm also going to make sure that there is a link to the Rhino video that I painted back in the day, because there are a few good tips in that still about painting bigger, flatter vehicles. So, I think that covers everything. Let's get started. Now obviously, to begin with, if you're going to dip a vehicle, well, you need a vehicle, and a Dreadnought is going to stand in here just fine. Now I know some of you are going to get a little bit cross that I haven't actually demonstrated the painting method on the vehicle. And there's a reason for that, and I've actually done this in another video with a Death Guard Rhino, where I point out, if you can paint a Space Marine, you can paint every single one of their vehicles. It's not like, for example, a historical army, where you need to know the different colors between the men's uniforms and the vehicles. It's a Space Marine. The colors are the same, the application of the paint is the same. There might be one or two minor differences in scale, but honestly, this fella is using all exactly the same stuff as I did for the infantry. So the only two actual acrylic paints that are on here are the black and the camouflage green. Everything else is speed paints, because that's how I've painted the infantry. Now, once I've done that, what I've gone ahead and done is to hit them with a quick varnish. Now, I've used here a satin varnish. If you've got one handy, for this stage, I would recommend a gloss varnish. Is going to be a little bit easier to apply things over the top of. It won't make a huge difference to our final product, but why not make it a little easier for yourself? Now, one detail that I haven't touched yet is going to be the plasma stuff on the bombard here. I'm going to leave that white. When I dip this, I'm still going to go over the top of that, but I am going to try and wick some of it away from those white sections, so I don't have so much tidy up to do later. And because I have covered most of these steps in the original painting video for this Death Guard method, what I'm going to do, we'll quickly blast through opening the can. And a real quick whiz around the inside of the lid with a bit of paper towel, just to get rid of any collected gunk there. Grab an old brush and stir thoroughly. And then once you're ready to apply, what I'd recommend is grab yourself the biggest brush you can get your hands on with a flat tip. Now this I find easiest to give a nice sweeping motion as I'm applying it, which is going to be important across those large flat panels. For some of these bits though, it's not going to matter too much at all. You just want to jam it in there and make sure that you're not missing any of the recesses. So after jamming some of it in and making a god-awful mess, then's the time to start gently sweeping it around with your brush, because obviously that's way too much in one place. So I'll sweep and keep applying to try and make sure that I'm not letting too much collect in any one place. So jam it on. Let it settle for a couple of seconds. You'll see it will smooth out. But here, yeah, way too much. So we'll just grab it up with my brush and then apply it somewhere it will look a little better. So this can be a little bit finicky the first couple of times you do it. I would suggest start with something you don't mind making a bit of a mistake with. So starting from the lower levels, we'll make it easier to jam stuff in there. Let it settle for a couple of seconds, because you're likely to hit your big flat panels up on top as you're getting to the undersuit, right? So once you've done the insides, the very deep parts, then you can bring your brush back and start smoothing out those top panels. So let's come back in a couple of seconds once I've got most of this guy dipped, and then we'll have a look at these big shoulder pads. Now, chances are good while you're working, you're going to end up with some areas where it's a little difficult to actually do that sweeping cleaning motion with your larger brush. So just switch to a slightly smaller one. It'll often help to have just a little bit of the dip still on your brush to make sure that that's going to fit properly. If it does look a little scratchy when it first goes on, just smooth it out, same as you would with your large brush. Okay, so I've got most of my armor done. There are a couple of bits where it's a little bit streakier than I would like, but I discovered that was because I was using the wrong stuff to rinse my brushes between things. Whoops! Make sure you're using something like turpentine or something suited for cleaning up oil stuff. Whoopsie doodle. Nonetheless, what we can do now is go ahead, load up my brush again. And the thing to bear in mind, if there's any one tip I can give you about the dip, it is that you will get a better result by applying too much and then starting to shift it away. If you don't apply enough in one go, what you'll end up with instead is more streaky, brush strokes and what have you. So this, of course, looks dreadful. That's way too much. So I'm going to rub most of that off on a bit of that kitchen towel and come back. And now that I've got the shading down, I can smooth this out a little bit with my brush. Just nice sweeping motions towards the edges. Yeah, now what I'm going to do is the other shoulder pad, and then we let this guy cure for a couple of days. So 3 days later, you'll see that once it has cured, it does level out a little bit. Once I varnish this though, it's going to smooth out a little bit more, and you'll see as well I have applied the decals because over a glossy finish like the dip gives us, it's going to give us an easier result to get those on. So let's go ahead and varnish this sucker. I'm going to take him out and hit him with a satin varnish. Then once your decals are applied and the varnish goes over the top, this is what we have. And you'll see how it does even out that finish quite a bit. Up on the shoulder pad here, I'm not 100% jazzed with how that's turned out, but that did come down to me, like I said, using the wrong thinners. Whoops. But everything else, yeah man, that's not too bad. A wee dry brush in a couple of spots is going to bring that up, and I'm going to weather him in the same way as I have done the Marines. Now you can of course just pop on over to the Centurion video if you want to see how that's done, but for completion's sake I am going to do it in this video as well. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of plate mail metal and a large dry brush. Now because of the way that the speed paint metallics kind of come away from the edges here, you're not going to notice a huge amount of this gathering at the edges of things straight away. I'm really using this more as a means to highlight the black and bring these elements in together. All the same, I'm going to go over all of the silver with it, just a wee bit of this to brighten things up a little bit and introduce a bit more of that metallic shine to things. Then with a slightly smaller dry brush, I have some true brass, and you can be pretty heavy with this in comparison to the silver because it's not going to show up quite as immediately, but it will add a nice shine to your brassy stuff. Now for a bit of weathering, what I have is a little bit of packing foam. Now this one actually comes from a sound baffling sheet, so one of those foam things that you stick on the wall which is supposed to reduce echo. It didn't, so I'm tearing it to bits as painting supplies. What I'll do is dip that into a little bit of oak brown over on my palette, and then on a bit of kitchen towel, just dab it a few times until I'm leaving very little behind. What I want to do then is concentrating towards some of the edges, and anywhere that I want it to look like our Dreadnought has caught a little bit of damage. Now it is easy to go overboard with this very quickly, so try not to go too heavy with it. In particular on your Dreadnoughts and stuff like that, it's weird because the larger surface kind of shows this stuff much more quickly than it would if it was on a Marine. So ironically, you might want to add more to your Marines but less to your great big walloping vehicles. All the same, a little bit of this on some of the leading edges. I think I may have gone a little overboard, but it doesn't matter. It looks cool. What I've got now is, again, another wee bit of that foam and some matte white. What I'm going to do now is, from above some of those chips, just add a little bit of the white to make it look a bit more three-dimensional. Now, you can do this with a brush, but that will take a fair chunk longer. So you see, I want to concentrate near to my chipping, but I don't want to completely cover it. And wherever possible, make it look a little three-dimensional. So above and around those brown chips, but not directly on them if you can avoid it. And you can do the same thing with this using necrotic flesh for any bits that are on the green. And I'm going to do that off screen. All right, now we're cooking. What I've mixed up on my palette here, this is 1 part of the dark rust color, which is really more of a thick sludge, and I've mixed in 5 dots of the Warpaint Stabilizer. Reason being is I want this to flow, and I don't want it to be quite so heavy where I put it. So here what we're going to do is just a few little bits where we want rust and grime to have accumulated, and it's going to be quite dark going on. Funnily enough, dark rust. I like using this particularly on vehicles, like Death Guard vehicles, because it gives the impression that this has been left untouched for a little while, as opposed to fresh rust, which looks a bit more bright orange by comparison. So this you can very quickly overpower a miniature with, same as I always say, but let's have some fun with it. This is a bit which can take a bit of time if you let it, but have some fun with this. This is where you start being able to really grime things up. So like I show you there, just dot in an area and then use your finger to smudge it, and you get a much more subtle sort of scratched in finish there. So have some fun. Away we go. Bit of rust. Yeah, now we're cooking. I think I may have overdone it slightly in some areas, but you'll see for the most part, exception being the big engine section here, I haven't put that over the metalwork, and that's because I want to use here rust tone. Now this one is a wash, and it's going to dry slightly differently to the slightly more acrylic finish that we get from the rust effects. So you'll see here, this has got a kind of greeny finish to it. And instead of popping this over the armor casings and what have you, I'm going to dribble a little bit of this onto the metalwork. So take your time with this. And again, I've probably added way too much, but one of the wonderful things about playing Death Guard, is too much rust and grime. Is there such a thing? Now, as well, you can also use this in areas where you have applied that rust effect. Just a little bit of that to thicken those out a touch. And the same dab and tap effect will work perfectly well here. Now, plasma effects on these guys are the easiest thing going, because these effects paints, the glow ones, are amazing. What I've got here is radiation glow. I'm chosen this because orange is what I'm going to use as kind of the spot and more interesting color on my Death Guard. So after having laid down a bit of white, my goodness, chuck this over the top. It is virulently bright. It is insane, but it will tone down a little bit as it dries, and it will also end up in the recesses a little bit too. So not quite as much as a speed paint would, but enough that, man alive, we get some of that that white glow from underneath. So I'm going to chuck this on all of the plasma coils. Then once that's dried, wow. I don't think the camera is actually picking up quite how intense that is. That is almost glowing. There's a saying that you paint for threat recognition, so that your opponent can tell at a glance what they're dealing with from across the table. I think my opponent could see me coming from the parking lot with this. This is insane. Now you could leave it here. It's actually quite bright. You get a little bit of the white from the undercoat showing through on the high points. But what I am going to do is grab myself some fresh matte white, and I'm going to aim for roughly the center of some of these coils and just back and forth with the flat of my brush if I can. Yeah. Just pick out. Man, that is so intense. It's actually, it's almost painful to paint over the top of, but it looks cool. So I'm going to do this over the plasma sections, whiten these up a bit. And now to finish off this utter madness, I have some gloss varnish, and I'm going to make sure that I'm getting it into all of the recesses, into that ribbing on the plasma weapon. And yeah, wow. Once I'm done with this, I'll go ahead and base him, and we'll have a look at what our Dreadnought looks like when he is all complete. My goodness. And so, there at last, our dipped Dreadnought is complete. So, the answer to the question, nice and quick, can you dip a vehicle? Yes, of course you can. Just because it's called dip doesn't mean you have to physically try and fit this sucker into the tin. It's never going to work, but with a large enough brush, you can get a pretty wicked result. Now, I do think that there were one or two mistakes along the way which were definitely my fault, and I do feel a little bit silly about that, but luckily, playing Death Guard, I get to cover them on all kinds of guff, let's say, and essentially work over those. But if you were looking at doing something a little tidier, what I might suggest would be instead to thin down the dip just a little before applying it. I think you'd probably get a smoother finish then, and it would give you a little bit more working time. All the same, man, I'm more than happy with that result. I am going to put that on the table and be one happy camper. It's probably going to get taken off within a few seconds. That is the way of these things, but I'm happy with how it looks. So again, thanks goes to the Army Painter for sponsoring these videos. Really happy to have their help with these ones. As well, thanks goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Yeah, really makes a difference. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all. I now have to try and figure out how to get a photo of this thing. You all enjoy the rest of your day.